Have you ever walked through a small town cemetery and noticed that one row, just one, has no headstones from a single specific August? In Deerfield, Massachusetts, 8 people died in our town that month. 7 of them are in the cemetery records. The 8th was my great-aunt, and her grave doesn't exist in any registry the town will admit to. My name is Samuel Briggs. I restore old houses for a living, which is a polite way of saying I spend my days inside other people's secrets. This whole town agreed to forget her name. Last fall, my grandfather died and left me the keys to a storage barn nobody had opened in decades. What I carried out of that barn ended up on the Massachusetts Attorney General's desk. The room went quiet when she opened it. So, before I take you back to the morning my grandfather's lawyer handed me a key on a piece of red yarn, do me a favor and hit subscribe. There's a moment in this story where the cemetery caretaker sat with me in his truck outside a church one night, and what he said is still in my head. If you're watching from a small town with its own quiet rooms full of names nobody says out loud, drop where you're listening from in the comments. Now, let me take you back to that morning. So, my grandfather Walter Briggs ran the Deerfield Memorial Cemetery from 1947 until 1968. That's 21 years of digging graves, mowing rows, and writing names into a leather-bound interment book that, near as I can tell, hasn't existed since 1968 either. He retired the year I was born. Took it personal, the family always said. Quit cold, sold his tools, moved into the little farmhouse on Bridge Road, and didn't go back to the cemetery for the rest of his life. Not even for funerals. Not even for my grandmother's funeral in 2009, and she's buried in row 12. I asked my mother once, when I was maybe 12, why Pop didn't go visit Grammy's grave. She was at the kitchen sink with a dish towel over her shoulder. She didn't turn around. She said, "Some people grieve different, honey. Eat your potatoes." And that was the answer I got for 30 years. Eat your potatoes. Walter passed on the 11th of October, 2023. Heart in his sleep on the back porch. He was 91. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, and I knew before I picked up. You always do. The funeral was small. Deerfield's a town of about 3,000, and most of the people who knew him were dead already. It rained the whole way through, the kind of October rain that just keeps going without ever turning into anything. My wife held an umbrella over both of us. I watched my mother put a single white carnation on the casket and walk back to the car without saying a word. After the burial, the lawyer pulled me aside in the lobby of the funeral home. Old man, wet eyes, brown suit, hands that shook a little when he held things. He had mint candies in his coat pocket. I could smell them when he leaned in. He handed me a manila envelope and said, "Walter wanted you to have these. Just you." He was specific. The envelope was heavier than it should have been. I held it in both hands. Inside was a key, a piece of red yarn knotted around it, and one folded sheet of paper with my grandfather's handwriting on it. The note said, "The barn behind the farmhouse. The crate under the floorboards in the back stall. Read it in order. Burn it if you have to. But Sammy, read it." I stood there in the funeral home lobby holding this thing, and a woman I didn't recognize, older lady, gray coat, gloves with little pearls on the wrists, walked past me and said very quietly, "Whatever he gave you, son, be careful." She didn't stop. She didn't look at me. She just kept walking out into the rain. I asked the funeral director who she was. He said he didn't know, said she wasn't on the guest list. I asked again an hour later. He said the same thing, but he wouldn't quite meet my eye when he said it the second time. That was Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. The yarn around the key was the color of Christmas ribbon, that bright, old-fashioned crimson, and it kept catching my eye every time I passed under a streetlight. I didn't open the barn that night. I sat in my truck in my own driveway with the engine off, until my wife came out and put a hand on the window. The morning my grandfather's storage barn became the loudest room in Massachusetts was the morning after. I drove out to the farmhouse the next morning. The barn sat behind it, sagging roof, chains on the doors, a padlock the size of my fist. I'd ridden past that barn 100 times as a kid. Walter never let anyone in. Said it was old paint and wasps. The key on the red yarn fit. Of course it did. The chain dropped into the gravel with that flat metal sound, and the door swung in on hinges that hadn't moved in years. I had to push. The bottom of the door dragged a little half circle through the dirt. Hay, oil, dust, mouse. There was a tractor under a tarp, some shovels, a workbench with rust on it, a row of mason jars on a high shelf full of nothing. Just dust and the late morning light coming through them in thin yellow bars. The kind of barn quiet that makes your own breathing sound loud. What I noticed standing in the doorway was that everything in there had been put away. Not abandoned, put away. The shovels were leaning blade down against the back wall in order of size. The workbench was clean. There was a coffee can with nails in it sorted by length. Walter had walked out of that barn the way a man walks out of a place he doesn't expect to come back to, but doesn't want to leave a mess behind. I went to the back stall, like the note said, pulled up the floorboards. They came up easier than I expected. Somebody had pried them up before me. The nails were bent. Sitting in the dirt underneath was a green wooden crate, the size of a small footlocker. Brass corners, a leather strap. The leather had gone stiff, but it hadn't cracked. Inside were 3 things. The first was a duplicate of my grandfather's interment book, the original cemetery register from 1947 to 1968. Hand-copied, page by page, every entry. Except this copy had a page the original didn't have. Page 47, August 14th, 1962. A name written in his careful, blocky hand. Lila Mae Calder, age 19. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Buried, unmarked, west boundary. I sat down on the floor of that barn and read that page maybe 9 times. The dirt floor was cold through my jeans. I didn't get up. 19 years old. There used to be a black and white picture of her on my grandmother's piano when I was small. A young woman in a pale dress, sitting on a porch step, squinting a little at the sun. I had not thought about that picture in 30 years. The piano went to my cousin in 1998, and the picture went with it, I think. I thought about it now. I thought about how, growing up, Lila Mae had been less of a person than a weather event in our family. Something that had happened. Something nobody talked about. The second thing was a doctor's note, handwritten, dated August 15th, 1962. Dr. Vance. The note said the patient at Deerfield Memorial Cemetery's morgue showed ligature bruising consistent with manual asphyxiation. Cause of death, not drowning. Not accidental. The handwriting on that note was steady. Whoever wrote it had been certain. The third thing was a sealed envelope. Walter's handwriting on the front. 4 words. For Sammy. When ready. I didn't open the envelope that day. I'm going to be honest with you. I closed the crate, put the floorboards back, locked the barn, and drove home. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for 40 minutes before I went inside. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anybody. I went into my workshop and I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, and I drank it standing up, and I couldn't tell you what it tasted like. You have to understand. My family had told me my whole life that my great-aunt Lila Mae drowned in the Connecticut River in 1962. Drowned. Slipped. Washed up 2 miles south. Tragedy. Don't bring it up around your grandmother, it upsets her. She didn't drown. And my grandfather knew. I want you to think about this for a second. I've been carrying this story around for a year and a half, and the part I still cannot get my head around is the quietness of it. There was no scandal, no argument, no big reveal moment in 1962. The town just agreed. I'm a longtime resident of Deerfield. I've lived here all my life except for a stretch in my 20s when I worked for a contractor in Springfield. So my mistake was thinking that because I'd known these people my entire life, they would tell me the truth if I asked them straight. I started with Charlie Halverson. Charlie has been the cemetery caretaker since 1968, the year my grandfather quit. He took over from Walter. He's 76 now.
White hair, navy work coat, hands the size of dinner plates. Charlie is the kind of man who has shaken every hand in Deerfield. Christmas tree lighting, Memorial Day, hospice fundraiser. He calls everyone neighbor. I drove out to the cemetery on a Saturday. He was raking leaves off row 8. The rake made that scraping sound on the gravel between graves. Back and forth, back and forth. I told him I was going through Walter's papers and had a question about a 1962 burial. He kept raking, didn't look up. I said the name, Lila Mae Calder. The rake stopped, just for a second. Then it started again.
He said, "There's no Calder in our records, son. Your aunt drowned, buried in Greenfield with her mother's people, I believe. You'd have to ask your folks about that." I said I had Walter's interment book, the original. I said the page existed. Charlie set the rake down. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his coat, put them back on. And then, in this very calm, almost concerned voice, he said, "Samuel, there are some chapters of this town's book that don't need rereading. Your grandfather understood that. Now you've come into something, I don't know what, and I'd hate to see you get the wrong impression of a good man's quiet life. He earned that quiet. So have we." I stood there. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to thank him. The other part understood I'd just been threatened politely. I couldn't tell which part of me was wrong. That's the thing I want you to sit with for a second. He had not raised his voice. He had not stepped toward me. He had not said one specific word that I could later repeat in a courtroom and have it mean what I knew it meant. He had simply rearranged my afternoon in his own quiet voice into a place where I was the one being unreasonable. He smiled at me. He smiled at me and he asked how my wife was. And he said, "Tell her happy belated for her birthday." He remembered my wife's birthday. I didn't even know he knew her name. He picked up the rake. He started moving down the row again. Then, casual as weather, he said over his shoulder, "Mill paid for the new gym at the high school 4 years ago. Did you know that?" I told him I didn't. He nodded. He kept raking. I sat in my truck in his cemetery's parking lot for 10 minutes before I started the engine. The radio came on, and I didn't hear it. Then I drove home. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. If you've ever had somebody you've known your whole life look at you like you're the problem for asking a normal question, you know what that does to a person's stomach. Tell me where you felt that. I'm reading these, because what was waiting for me at home that winter was worse than what Charlie said in that cemetery. Somebody had started watching. That was the moment I stopped sleeping right. The next 4 months were what I want to call the long, slow hum. I want to slow down here, because what happened to me that winter wasn't dramatic. That's the point. Nothing dramatic happened. And that was the most disturbing thing of all. I went to the county records office in Greenfield, asked for the 1962 death certificate for Lila Mae Calder. The clerk, woman about my age, polite, typed for a while, then said the file had been transferred to state archives in 2009. I asked for the transfer log. She said the transfer log itself wasn't digitized. I'd have to file a written request. She gave me a form. I filed it. 8 weeks later, I got a response saying the form had been received. Nothing else. I called the coroner's office 3 times that week. 3 times, voicemail. Nobody called back. I went to my mother. She's 71, lives in the same house I grew up in, makes a pot roast every Sunday. I asked her about Lila Mae. She put down the dish towel, looked at me for a long time, and said, "Sammy, your grandfather is barely cold. Whatever you're doing, don't." I asked her if she knew. She said, "I know that asking is how you lose your friends in this town. That's what I know." I went to the Historical Society. The president there, older gentleman, retired English teacher, beloved figure, listens to me politely for about 10 minutes, and then told me the Historical Society didn't deal in private family matters. When I left, he walked me to the door, patted me on the shoulder, and said, "Walter was a fine man. Let him rest, son." By Christmas, I had been gently rebuffed by, I don't know, maybe 9 people. Some of them I'd known 30 years. Nobody yelled at me. That was the strange part. Nobody said no.
Everybody had a piece of advice that was actually a closed door. That's what I want you to understand. The whole town wasn't hiding from me. The whole town was managing me. There was one phrase that started to stick out. I heard it 3 different times from 3 different people who, far as I knew, didn't talk to each other. Charlie, the Historical Society president, and an old woman at church who I'll come back to. All 3 of them, at some point in our conversations, said some version of, "Your grandfather earned his quiet." Not a quiet life, not peace, earned his quiet. Like quiet was a thing you bought. I didn't know what to do with that yet. So I started doing what Walter had done. I bought a Mead notebook at the Greenfield Stop and Shop. The cheap kind, marbled black and white cover, $2 on sale. I numbered the pages. I started copying everything. Every name I'd been given, every refusal phrase, every date a phone call wasn't returned. I locked it in the workshop in the same spot Walter locked his tools. The combination on the lock was my grandmother's birthday. I think Walter had used the same one. I never asked. That's when the small things started. In late January, I came home from a job site in Northampton, and a black pickup followed me from the on-ramp at Route 2 all the way to the Bridge Road turnoff. Held back 2 car lengths. When I turned into my driveway, it kept going. I didn't get the plate. I told myself it was nothing. I wrote it in the notebook anyway. A week later, on a Sunday morning, I drove out to the cemetery. I'd been going on Saturdays to look at the western fence, and there were fresh footprints in the snow along the western boundary, my boot prints from the day before, plus another set, wider tread. They came up to where I'd been standing, square in front of the spot I'd been looking at, and they stopped. Then they walked back the way they came. Whoever it was had stood where I had stood long enough to leave a clean imprint of both heels. The phone calls started the week after that. Wrong number the first time. Old man's voice. He said, "Sorry, wrong number," and hung up. Second time, no voice, just breath. Third time, same. The breath was steady, not heavy, patient, like somebody who had all the time in the world to wait for me to hang up first. 3 calls in 4 days. The 4th time, I let it ring. Marguerite Vance has run the Deerfield Public Library since 1986. She's 73 years old, less than 5 feet tall, wears the kind of cardigans with the little fabric-covered buttons. Her father was the doctor on the 1962 note in my grandfather's barn. I had been avoiding her for months because of who her father was. I figured if anybody in town was going to be loyal to the official version, it was the doctor's daughter. I was wrong about that. I was so wrong about that. In early February, I went to the library to look at microfilm of the 1962 Deerfield Gazette. I was alone in the back room. Marguerite came in with a cup of tea, set it down next to me without saying anything, and walked back out. When I picked up the cup, there was a folded napkin under it. The napkin said in pencil, "Bridge Road Farmhouse, tonight. Knock twice." I sat in the microfilm room for another hour pretending to read newspapers. I drove home. I told my wife I had to go look at a job site. I got back in the truck at 8. I drove to the Bridge Road Farmhouse, my grandfather's farmhouse, which I'd been going to clean out for months and hadn't yet. And Marguerite's car was already in the driveway. She had a key. Of course she had a key. She was at the kitchen table when I came in. The kitchen smelled like coffee. She'd brought a thermos. There was a stack of folders in front of her, manila, neat-edged, the kind a librarian keeps. She was taking her gloves off. Pearl-buttoned gloves. A gray coat folded over the back of the chair next to her. I knew before I knew. I said, "It was you at the funeral." She didn't look up. She said, "I needed to see if Walter actually told you. I almost didn't." I sat down. She poured coffee into the thermos cup and set it in front of me. Her hands shook a little. I don't think she meant for me to see it. She didn't speak for 30 seconds, maybe more. I counted the ticks of the kitchen clock. Then she said, very quietly, "Sit down, Samuel." I was already sitting. Then, "I have been waiting 55 years to put these in somebody's hands. I thought I'd know what to say." She put her hand on the folders. I asked her, and I want to tell you, my voice cracked, I wasn't proud of it. I asked her if my grandfather had done it. She looked at me with the kindest face I have ever been looked at with. And then she did something I'll always remember. She paused.
like the next word cost her something. She said, "Your grandfather did not kill her. Your grandfather is the only reason any of this still exists." I cried in that kitchen. I'm going to be honest, I cried. Then she opened the first folder. The exposition came in fragments, between folders, between long pauses where she stared at the table and at nothing. Her father had given her these in 1991 on his deathbed. He had carried them for 23 years before that. He told her not to open them unless somebody from Walter's family came asking. Nobody had, until me. I want to pause here for a second. If you'd inherited a duplicate cemetery register from a grandfather who quit his job in 1968 and never told you why, would you have opened the barn? Or would you have left the key on a hook in the kitchen and let it stay buried? I want to know which one you are, honestly. Because what Marguerite was about to lay out on Walter's kitchen table that night made the barn feel like the easy decision. What I learned next changed how I saw everything that came before it. The folders held three things. First, a photocopy of a contract dated September 2nd, 1962, 3 weeks after Lila Mae died. The contract was between the Whitfield Mill Holding Company and the town of Deerfield, Massachusetts. The contract said the Whitfield family would assume $40,000 of municipal debt, which in 1962 was the entire town's annual operating shortfall, in exchange for what the contract called, in print, the cessation of public inquiry into the death of L.M. Calder, ruled accidental by the Office of the Medical Examiner. You read that right. They put it in writing. Page 2 had 13 signatures. Selectman, town clerk, the mill owner, the chief of police, the priest at St. Bartholomew's, the editor of the Gazette. 13 names. Some of those names are still on storefronts on Main Street. Second folder, a letter from Eddie Riley's mother dated November of 1962. Eddie Riley was Lila Mae's boyfriend. The official story for 61 years was that Eddie killed her and fled. The letter from Eddie's mother said Eddie hadn't fled. Eddie had been found in a field in February of 1963 with a single gunshot wound. The town said it was a hunting accident. Buried in the Catholic cemetery in Greenfield, same year, same cover-up. 2 victims, 1 silence, 1 paid contract. Third folder, Walter's own affidavit, handwritten, dated 1968, the year he quit. Walter had buried Lila Mae himself at the western boundary of the cemetery without a marker. Because the death certificate ruled it a drowning, the town wouldn't pay for a stone. Walter had been ordered to bury her in a quiet grave. He did it. He went home that night and copied every line of his internment book into a duplicate. He started keeping copies of everything for 6 years. Anytime a body came in that didn't sit right, and Marguerite said there were 2 more, one in 1964, one in 1965, he documented it. He kept a parallel record of his own town for 6 years. In 1968, his quitting wasn't grief. It was what he could do. He couldn't expose them. Charlie's father was the chief of police. Charlie himself was a deputy by then, and the town had already shown what it would do for $40,000. So Walter walked away. He took his copies. He buried them in a barn, and he waited for somebody in his own family, somebody who hadn't signed any contracts, to be ready. He waited 61 years. Marguerite said Lila Mae had worked at the library 3 afternoons a week. She had been planning to apply to a teacher's college in Albany. Marguerite said her father, the doctor, the one who wrote the note, used to bring Lila Mae books. He liked her. Marguerite said it like that, plainly. He liked her. She said it was the first thing her father told her when he handed her the folders, before they killed a girl. First, he liked her. I went home that night and unlocked the sealed envelope from the original crate, the one that said, "For Sammy, when ready." It was 3 sentences. Don't trust the police. Don't trust the priest. Take it to the state. That was my grandfather. That was the man who wouldn't visit my grandmother's grave. Not because he didn't love her, because he couldn't walk the rows of that cemetery without seeing what was buried at the western fence. You know by now this isn't the kind of story I tell to a small audience. Hit subscribe. Hit like. The next part is the one I'd want you to be ready for. And I wanted to ask you before we go any further, do you believe him? Walter, I mean? Do you believe a man who watches a cover-up happen and stays silent for 60 years is a hero? Or is he a coward who got lucky with a grandson? I've gone back and forth in my head about 100 times, and what happened next is, I think,
the part of this story that broke me. I didn't sleep that week. My wife asked me what was wrong, and I told her finally. I told her everything. She sat on the edge of our bed at 3 a.m. and listened to me lay out the contract, the letter, the affidavit. When I finished, she said, "Sammy, you can't go to the local police. Walter wrote that for a reason. You go to the state." She was right. Of course she was right. But I want to tell you what I did before I went to the state, because it's the thing I'm least proud of and the thing I'm most proud of. It was the same thing. I went back to Charlie Halverson.
There's a basement room under St. Bartholomew's Church where the Knights of Columbus meet on Tuesday nights. Charlie's a knight. So was my grandfather, until 1968. I drove down on a Tuesday in mid-March and waited in the parking lot until Charlie came out alone around 9:30. I asked him to sit with me in his truck. I told him I had Walter's records. I told him I had Marguerite's folders. I told him I knew about Eddie Riley. I told him I knew about the contract. I want you to picture this. We're sitting in the cab of his Ford. The dome light is on. The radio's off. He's 76 years old. His hands are on the steering wheel even though we're parked. He doesn't look at me. He says, "What do you want, Samuel?" I said I wanted him to tell me, in his own words, why it was worth it. Why a town buried a 19-year-old girl twice. I said I wasn't recording. I said I wasn't here for the police. I said I wanted to know. He was quiet for a very long time. And then he said something I never expected. He said, "Her treatments," and the words stopped in his mouth. He swallowed. He started again with a steady voice and didn't crack again. "My daughter has cancer. Her treatments are at Mass General. The mill paid for the first round in 1998. They've been paying ever since. The Whitfield Foundation. There's no Whitfield family left, Samuel. Just a foundation that pays bills for the people who kept the contract. 47 of us, last I counted. Their kids, their grandkids. The school had a new gym 4 years ago. The mill paid for the gym. There is no mill anymore. There's just a foundation. And the foundation pays as long as the contract holds." I didn't say anything. He said, "Your grandfather understood that. Pity that didn't make it down the bloodline." He looked at me when he said that, and the look on his face was sad. It wasn't cruel. It was sad. I actually laughed, not because anything was funny, because what else do you even do? He said, "You think you found something, son. You found a piece of paper. What I have is 47 mortgages, a children's hospital wing in Springfield, and 3 generations of this town's school budget. You bring that paper to the state, you don't expose a murderer. He's been dead since 1981. You take groceries out of houses. You bury sick kids. Think about that before you call anybody." I sat there for a count I don't remember. I said, 47? He said, 47 last I counted. I said, "How many kids?" He didn't answer that one. The dome light stayed on. The dashboard clock blinked 1 minute forward. He didn't move. I got out of his truck. I'm about to tell you what I did at 6:14 the next morning. Before I do, knowing what Charlie just said about 47 families, would you have made the call? Don't wait until the end of this video to answer that. Tell me now, yes or no. Be honest. Because what I'm about to tell you is the only decision in this story I cannot take back, and I want to know if you'd have lived with it. I drove home. My wife was asleep. I sat at our kitchen table from midnight until 5 a.m. and tried to figure out if I was about to do the right thing or the worst thing I would ever do. There's a kind of math you do at 4 in the morning that doesn't add up at sunrise. I made the call at 6:14. The cold case unit said the Assistant Attorney General could meet me Thursday. That gave me 34 hours. 34 hours to decide if I was going to walk into that building with a banker's box or burn it in the wood stove and tell my grandfather in my head that I was sorry. I drove to Boston on a Thursday in late March. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office is on Ashburton Place, 6th floor, big glass doors, security desk in the lobby. I had Walter's interment book copy. I had the doctor's note. I had the contract. I had the letter from Eddie Riley's mother. I had the affidavit. I had everything in a brown banker's box on the seat next to me. I had not slept in 3 days.
The assistant attorney general who saw me was 40-something, Bronx accent, no nonsense. I had requested the meeting through the cold case unit 2 weeks earlier and submitted a 1-page summary. She had read it. She had clocked it. She had cleared an hour for me. I want to tell you what that hour felt like. I'm not going to tell you everything I said. We'd be here another 45 minutes. But I'll tell you this. She let me talk. She didn't interrupt. She didn't take notes. She just looked at me.
When I finished, when I'd put the contract on the conference table and the doctor's note and the affidavit and Walter's duplicate register open to page 47, she stood up. She walked over to the table. She picked up the contract. She read page 2, the signatures page, silently. She set it back down. She walked over to the window. She came back. She put her hand on the duplicate register. She looked down at page 47 for a long time. I counted to 30 in my head. She was still looking. Then she said, very quietly, "I'll be honest with you. I haven't seen one quite like this. The signatories make this." "Yeah." She caught herself. "Mr. Briggs, this is enough." She looked up at me. She said, "We're going to need to take all of this. We're going to need you to give a sworn statement. We're going to be in touch with the state police cold case unit by the end of the day." She paused. She picked up the contract one more time. She looked at it differently this time. Slower. Something in her face had changed. She said, "Mr. Briggs, your grandfather copied this register every year for 61 years. He wasn't documenting a murder. He was documenting an ongoing crime. Each one of those copies, dated, is a count of obstruction. Your grandfather built us a 61-count indictment without ever filing a single one. We can move on the surviving signatories. We can move on the Whitfield Foundation. We can move on Charlie Halverson. Every year he didn't report. This is a year of conspiracy." I asked her about the 47 families. She looked at me for a long time. She said, "Mr. Briggs, I'm going to give you the most honest answer I can. The foundation gets frozen. Those families lose what the foundation pays. That is real. That is going to hurt people who didn't sign anything. That's the cost. The other cost is that a girl is in an unmarked grave at the back of a cemetery, and the people who arranged for her to be there have been comfortable for 61 years. I'm not going to tell you which cost is bigger. I'm going to tell you the law cares about one of them and not the other." I sat there. I just sat there. She said, "Take a minute." She didn't take it with me. She picked up the desk phone. She dialed. She said, "It's Inez. I need state police cold case here today. I have a witness. And I need you to pull the file on Charlie Halverson's father, chief of police, Deerfield, 62 through 78. Yeah, the father." She was making the call while I was still in the room. I want to tell you, I made a noble decision. I want to tell you I weighed it carefully. I'm going to be honest with you. I just signed the statement. I drove home. I didn't say a word the whole way back. I didn't turn on the radio. I crossed the bridge over the Connecticut River about a quarter mile from where they pulled my great-aunt's body out, allegedly drowned in 1962. I pulled over on the shoulder. I sat on the hood of my truck, and I said her name out loud for the first time in my life. Lila Mae Calder. I waited to feel something. I just felt cold in my chest. The wind came up off the river. It didn't fix anything. I think I want you to know that. Her name didn't belong to me anymore. The next 90 days were the strangest of my life. The state moved fast and quiet. There was no press conference. There was a knock on Charlie Halverson's door on a Wednesday morning in early April. He answered it in his slippers. They asked him to come in for a voluntary interview. He went. He didn't come back to Deerfield as a free man. Charlie was charged with obstruction of justice, tampering with a death investigation, and conspiracy. His lawyers traded the 61 counts for a single conspiracy plea. 30 months. He'll be 79 when he comes home. The Whitfield Foundation was frozen pending civil investigation. 47 families lost their monthly assistance. I knew some of those names. Some of those families didn't know why the money stopped. They only knew it stopped. Some of them figured it out and put the pieces together.
Some of them came to my house. One woman my mother knew called me a parasite on my front porch. Then she sat on my steps and cried. I sat next to her. Neither of us said anything. The state attorney general announced, quietly, on a Monday afternoon, in a press release that ran 14 lines, the posthumous identification of Henry Whitfield, Jr. as the principal suspect in the deaths of Lila Mae Calder and Edward Riley. No prosecution was possible. He'd been dead since 1981. The press release said the state offered its condolences to the families. That's it. That's the official ending. 14 lines on a Monday afternoon.
The town fractured. About a third of Deerfield turned on me. They lost the foundation money. They lost a man they'd respected for 50 years. And they lost a story they'd been telling themselves about who they were. About a third went silent, neither side. About a third quietly came up to me, sometimes at the gas station, sometimes at the post office, sometimes leaving a casserole on my porch with no name on it, and said some version of, "Thank you." My mother was one of the last group. She told me in a voicemail. She has not been able to say it to my face yet. A new headstone went up at the western boundary of Deerfield Memorial Cemetery in late June. Lila Mae Calder, 1943 to 1962. Beloved daughter and sister. Found. The state paid for it. I picked the word found. I think Walter would have picked the same word. Eddie Riley's grave got a new stone too. His sister, who's 81 and lives in Florida, drove up from Tampa to be there when they set it. She held my hand at the cemetery. She told me her brother had been a bad mechanic and a worse dancer. She laughed when she said it. There's a thing nobody tells you about exposing a 60-year-old crime. You don't get a parade. You get a long, slow, complicated mess. You get phone calls at midnight from people who are angry and people who are grateful and people who don't know which one they are. You get a town that doesn't know what to do with you. You get a marriage that has to absorb the weight of a year of you not being okay. What you get back is a name on a stone. I want you to think about that the next time someone tells you that justice is clean. I want to tell you what I learned about my grandfather, because this is the part I almost couldn't write. In late summer, Marguerite gave me one more thing, a letter from Walter, written in 1991, addressed to whoever in his family would eventually open the barn. She had kept it because, she said, Walter wanted you to have something to read after, not before. He didn't want you doing this for him. The letter was 3 pages. I'm going to summarize it for you because reading it out loud is something I still can't do. Walter wrote that he had been ordered by the chief of police, Charlie Halverson's father, to dig the grave at the western fence and to log the burial as accidental drowning. He did it. He wrote that he was a coward in 1962, and that copying the records every year was not heroism, it was penance. He hoped one of his grandchildren would have what he didn't. He ended the letter with a sentence I want to share with you. He wrote, "The names you don't say out loud become the names a town forgets it ever knew. I have said hers every night before I slept, since the August she died. I am tired now. Sammy, you say it. I have said it. I say it every August 14th. I expect I'll say it for the rest of my life." My grandmother's grave is in row 12. Walter's is now next to hers. I went to row 12 for the first time in October, a year to the day after Walter died. I'd avoided the cemetery for the entire previous year. I couldn't walk those rows without thinking about what was at the western fence. My mother came with me. We didn't say much. She put her hand on my grandmother's stone. She said, "She knew, Sammy. Your grandmother knew. She kept his secret too. That's why she stayed with him." Then she walked over to the western fence and stood at Lila Mae's new headstone for a long time. She said finally, "I had a great aunt. I never heard her name in this family until you said it. She had brown hair, dimples. There's a picture in the attic. I'll bring it down after dinner." That picture is on my desk now. So here's what's true today. It is October 14th, 2 years after my grandfather died. I'm 39 now. I'm sitting at the kitchen table in the Bridge Road farmhouse, which my wife and I are slowly fixing up. It's raining. Not hard. The kind that decides every 5 minutes whether to keep going. The barn behind the house is empty. The crate is in the state archives. The original 1962 register, which everyone in town swore had been destroyed in a basement flood, was found in Charlie Halverson's home safe by a state investigator in April. 61 years. He had never destroyed it. I sometimes wonder if he'd been waiting for somebody to come ask, too. I don't think I'll ever know. Charlie's daughter passed in August. Her treatments stopped when the foundation froze. The state covered her last 6 weeks. She was 51. I went to her funeral. Her brother wouldn't shake my hand. Her son did. He was 23. He told me very quietly, "I'm not mad at you. I want you to know that. I just don't know what to do with what I know now." I told him I didn't know either. I think that was an honest answer. My mother now mentions Lila Mae by name. Not often, once, maybe twice a season. She said her name at Thanksgiving. Nobody at the table flinched. I want to tell you the small thing that happened this morning, because I think it's the right place to leave us. I went out to start the truck. The driveway was wet. There was an envelope under the windshield wiper, no name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 8 names typed on it. The 5 other people who, between 1958 and 1965, died in Deerfield under what the typed note called questionable circumstances. 3 names I'd already heard. 5, I had not. There was no signature. Whoever left it walked back into Deerfield and went home. I am going to make some calls. I don't yet know what I'm going to find. I might not find anything. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that this kind of story doesn't end. It widens. So, before I go, to whoever has stayed with me through this whole thing, who sat through 45 minutes of a man telling you about a barn and a register and his great-aunt, thank you. I'm not going to pretend I told you this story for any reason except that I needed to. If hitting subscribe and like helps stories like this find people who have their own quiet rooms full of names, please do. There's somebody in your life, or your family, or your town, whose name nobody says out loud. You know exactly who I mean. Walter said her name every night for 61 years. I say it now. That's how it starts. My name is Samuel Briggs. I am 39 years old. I restore old houses for a living. The girl in the picture on my desk is Lila Mae Calder, and she was 19, and we are still her family. Good night from Deerfield.